England, a cold morning, January 1832. And in the British Parliament, there are two groups of politicians talking to each other, debating as to whether they should abolish slavery or not. There's one group of members of Parliament that is successfully arguing that there's no way that in the middle of the worst economic crisis that England has seen in decades, they could possibly be talking about voluntarily and proactively giving up what they thought was their economic advantage, free labor. After a lot of back and forth and a lot of debate, the right decision was made and slavery was abolished. That was a historic day for England, not because they made the right decision, but because that decision forced members of the civil society, elected officials, members of parliament, to have to work together with scientists and members of the academic world, alongside with entrepreneurs and business people and companies, and for all of them to come together and find and create the right conditions for innovation and entrepreneurship to flourish in the English society. It was a tough decision, but the right decision. It was their competitive advantage that made the difference. But it was a big day in the history of the UK, because as they were talking to each other, trying to find an alternative to free labor and create the right conditions once again for innovation, a lot of technological breakthroughs were developed, namely the steam engine, which gave birth, in turn, to the transatlantic shipping industry and the train as we know it. And that gave birth to the Industrial Revolution, which made England the most powerful nation and the most powerful economy that the world had ever seen. That's actually how I see it. We are now at a very historic moment in our time. And I honestly believe that there are many challenges ahead of us that we must deal with. What you see here is what those challenges are. In fact, my team was not able to find a single scientific publication that was able to say or argue that that's not true. Let me start with population. My father was born in 1945, and back then, the population of the world was 1.8 billion people. In one generation, we have gone from 1.2 to cross 7 billion people just a few months ago. We'll probably go up to 10 billion by 2030. Living standards. When you actually look at the GNP, the GDP, and the rent per capita across nations, you see that for the last 100 years, living standards have been raising and will continue to raise. As more people live in the planet and they have more disposable income, we can see how they will probably want to consume more, buy a second car and second home, consume more meat and more Western products. But that is putting a lot of pressure on the scarce and limited resources of our planet. Most experts agree that the energy demand will continue to rise because of it. More population, more income, more consumption, more demand. But also, the water supplies will continue to decrease because of it. We continue to generate more industrial waste everywhere. We'll continue to emit CO2 into the environment. But I actually think that most people out there are not going to stand by and do nothing about it. And most experts agree that we will see also a rise when it comes to environmental concerns of our society. And this is all happening at a time when there's a lot of limitations and constraints for traditional fossil fuels. I would argue that the companies that find solutions to these challenges and problems will probably be the next and future Facebooks and Googles and Apples and those companies that have not even been created yet. So here are the 3 points I want to share with you today. Number one, the debate is over when it comes to climate change. Because of that, we will live in a carbon-constrained world that will change how we think about pollution and energy. And lastly, that we will see an unprecedented growth in green technology use and innovation, which will result in historic business and investment opportunities for governments, institutions, entrepreneurs, and companies. Get ready. So let's begin with the first point. The climate change debate is over. What you see here on the left part of this graph is actually what has happened over the course of the last 1,000 years when it comes to our ability to generate and contaminate the environment and how the levels of concentration of greenhouse gases have been behaving. What you see on the right is the evolution of the temperatures across the world and what has happened particularly after the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. You can see that there's a direct correlation between a rise in temperatures and our ability to contaminate and to emit more and more pollution. But I think that the debate is over for many other reasons. If one of you, and I hope this never happens to you, gets ill, you'll probably want a second opinion. In the case of the world, the IPCC, the United Nations Panel on Climate Change, has gotten not one or two, 7 different opinions. This panel is made of over 3,000 different scientists from all over the world, and they all agree with that with a 95% chance climate change is not only real, but it's us, human beings, that are accelerating this process. So yes, I think the debate is over. And I would also argue that there is no political color or political ideology that matters when it comes to this particular issue. Whether it's Merkel in Germany, whether it's the Republicans or the Democratic Party in the United States, or whether it's the communist leadership in China, the debate is over. We can argue here as to what we do about it. Nothing, a lot, but there is no debate as to the fact that climate change is real and it's a present danger. So if that's the truth, and I believe it is, we'll have to adapt. We'll have to make changes to the way we live, to our economy, and to the way we interact with the planet. Let's talk about that second point a little bit more. And I want to begin by quoting something that President Obama said last year during the State of the Union address. He said, "We need to get behind innovation. That's how America will lead the world in clean energy. The nation that leads the world in clean energy will lead the global economy in the 21st century." Now, let me tell you, the race is on. And all the top economies and the top nations are trying to position themselves over the other to win this battle because it makes perfect sense for them. Because what's at stake here is nothing else than their economic advantage. What you see here is the global total new investment in clean energy from 2004 until the present. In the year 2004, the world invested approximately $54 billion in different renewable energy projects across the world. By the time 2012 ends, we'll have invested this year over $300 billion. From 2004 until now, we have invested over $1 trillion in renewable energy projects. Let's talk about the United States economy, the largest, most powerful economy in the world, and what's happening there. What you see here on the left part of this graph is the United States federal budget for the deployment of renewable energies in the United States in the year 2008, and what happened after President Obama came into office. Our budget was $1.2 billion in a country of 300 million people. We went from $1.2 billion to $15 billion, and that wasn't just a rise one year over the other. This is actually a commitment by the Obama administration to invest a minimum of $15 billion every year for the next decade. We will have invested $150 billion in the next 10 years. Why is this important? Because today in the United States, when you look at the energy mix of that country, you see that clean energy, quote unquote, is about 7%. It's not really true because about 4.5% is actually hydropower from water, which means that if you talk about solar and wind, you're actually talking about 2.5% solar and wind as sources of renewable energy in the United States. What's going to happen when we go from 2.5% to 25% in the next couple of years? The United States will achieve massive scale of innovation and research, and it will become one of the largest markets for these technologies in the world. The United States is now investing more money in research and development and innovation than ever before. We have never, in fact, spent so much money in such a short time frame in one single strategic sector of our economy. In fact, there are a lot of people out there calling this investment plan the new Apollo project, making a reference to what it meant for the United States to actually send a man to the moon from an industrial and innovative and entrepreneurial perspective. A lot of the new technologies that we now take for granted, like internet, Wi-Fi, GPS, personal computers, that all came from that era of massive innovations and defining a priority when it comes to research and development. We are now investing more money, proportionally speaking, than ever before in clean tech and renewable energies in the United States. China, this is not just happening in Europe and the United States, it's happening worldwide. This is a global phenomenon. Look at the case of China. I'm not going to go into detail, but I will share with you one piece of data, which I think is fascinating and very surprising. When you actually look at the last 5 years of growth in investment in clean energy in China, you would be surprised to learn that they have been growing 95% every year. So let's go to the third point. We will see an unprecedented growth in green technology use and innovation, which will result in historic business and investment opportunities for governments and business that seize the moment. And what do I mean by that? The pen drive that I'm using today for this presentation holds about 5 gigabytes of memory. And the cost at any store here or even in the United States is $3 to $5. What's actually surprising is that 10 years ago, that very same pen drive, or at least the capacity to hold that much memory, would cost about $5,000. 25 years ago, it cost $120 million. Innovation increases competitiveness and brings prices down. And I would argue that this is exactly what's happening to the sector of renewable energy and clean technologies around the world. Let's look at what's happening to the price of photovoltaic solar panels since 1976 when they first hit the market for commercial purposes. You can see it there. The prices go down every single year. But what's really, really telling is that prices have fallen 75% since 2008. Just in the last year alone, they have fallen 45%. And what's happening to LED lighting? Same thing. From the 1970s when they hit the market until now, prices continue to come down every year. What's happening to the cost of lithium-ion batteries? The very same thing. And falling prices and innovation don't just, allow you to buy more stuff. They also create industries, interesting and very profitable industries. What you see here is the total global cumulative installed solar power generation capacity from 1996 until 2012. What you see there is that in 1996, around the world, we only had about 1,000 megawatts of installed solar capacity. We have gone in 16 years from 1,000 to 52,000 megawatts around the world today and growing. Look at what innovation does to technology. In the case of wind turbines, in the 1980s, the average wind turbine was able to generate approximately half a megawatt. Today, there are several companies, both in Germany and the United States, that are marketing wind turbines that are able to generate more than 10 megawatts. That's enough power in one wind turbine to power over 10,000 homes. I'm not going to go into a lot more details and tell you all the great sectors, but they're there. I want you to please go out there and do the research. The opportunities are boundless. They're there for you. Energy and energy efficiency, green construction and renovation, ecological consumer products, and I'll talk a little bit more about that now, chemical products, nanotechnology applied to renewable energy and energy efficiency. That's all out there. It's growing. It's now a reality. But if you don't agree with me, and if you don't believe any of the numbers, statistics, or even projections that I've shared with you today, and let me tell you, they come from very, very good sources. I hope that you will agree with me because of what I'm going to share with you now, which makes perfect common sense. So let me say it. There is a strong social demand for this change to take place. Now, not tomorrow, today. What you see here is a survey conducted by the European Union in every of the 27 member states of the European Union. This was done last year in the midst of the worst economic crisis this country has seen, or Europe for that matter, in the last 100 years. And look at the conclusions. 90% of Europeans recognize climate change as an important issue that impacts their lives directly. 89% believe that there should be a greater allocation of resources toward environmental causes despite the current economic crisis. 81% supported centralized European Union legislation focused on protecting the environment. This is happening here in our backyard, in Europe. And this is not just, something that Europeans only can afford to do. It's a global phenomenon. It's happening everywhere. This survey was conducted by Abbas Media, which is the third largest media group in the world. It was actually conducted in 21 different countries in 5 different continents. Look at the conclusions. 80% of the population would rather buy products from companies that try to reduce their environmental impact on global warming. 90% of that 80% would consume more environmentally friendly products if they would have other options at the same or lower price. Now, I don't know how many entrepreneurs we have here today or representative of companies, and I know there are some of you out there. Pay close attention to this, because what you actually see here is actually very telling. It tells you that if you're able to produce, market, and sell products that are green and responsible with the environment, 90% of the people are going to buy your products over the competition. Talk about an opportunity. And here's another piece of information that is quite interesting to me. 91% of the population believe that companies and governments should lead the fight against climate change. Why is that important to you? If you're an elected official or a government representative, pay attention to this. Because this is telling you that if you don't do anything about it, they're going to hold you responsible for it. But it also tells you that both consumers and voters out there are willing to penalize you or reward you for the things you do or don't do going forward. And it is very telling. So here again, my 3 conclusions. The debate is over, and the scientific evidence around it, it's overwhelming and unquestionable, at least for me. Number 2, we will live in a carbon-constrained world that will change how we perceive and think about energy and pollution. And finally, that we will see an unprecedented growth in green technologies, but also opportunities and new business ideas. And that's important, because what you see here is actually a picture of my daughter. I was very lucky to actually have a baby. Well, I didn't have a baby, my wife did. But I was very lucky. 2 months ago today, Allegra came to this world. And as I was thinking about a way to finish my presentation, I thought of how the Greek ancient culture thought of the word timing. They talk about time in 2 different ways. Number 1, they use the word chronos. And when they talked about time in that definition, they were talking about lineal time, the actual time that you can actually measure, a day, an hour, a year, or a decade. But they also talk about kairos. And to the Greeks, kairos was the time of opportunity. The point in time when everything changes and nothing will ever be the same. There are 3 young people in Egypt talking to each other, and they open up a Twitter account, and then they open up a Facebook account, and they start talking to their friends and colleagues, and before you know it, thousands of people are marching down the streets. Things change. There's a kairos moment in Egypt, in the Middle East. Nothing will ever be the same there. To me, my kairos moment was when my daughter was born, and nothing will ever be the same. That was a time of opportunity. So let me leave you with a question. The question I want to leave you with is not whether this is a kairos moment in our time, because it is. It is a kairos time, and the evidence is there, and I hope I've shared with you at least some evidence of that. The questions I want to leave you with are, number 1, will we be able to reinvent ourselves, to redefine our economic structure and model, to think of innovation and entrepreneurship as the key to the 21st century and our competitive advantage going forward? will we be able to do this not only because it makes ethical and moral sense, but because it makes economic sense as well? And lastly, will we be able to do this not just because it's the right thing for you and for me to do, but because it's the right thing for our children and for the next generations? Thank you.